Commander Jewry Park stood on the gleaming metal platform of the diplomatic vessel, her heart beating faster than usual. The air in her environmental suit felt stuffy, but protocol demanded she wear it until the Vorlathians confirmed their atmosphere was safe for humans. This was her first major assignment, leading humanity's initial diplomatic contact with the insect-like aliens who had reached out to Earth just 8 months ago. "Remember, Commander," Captain Do-hyun whispered beside her, "no sudden movements. Maintain formal distance, and follow their lead for greetings." Jewry nodded. She had studied the preliminary cultural briefings extensively. The Vorlathians were extremely protective of their personal space. This made sense for beings with exoskeletons that contained sensitive nerve endings. The airlock doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing 5 tall Vorlathians. Their bodies resembled praying mantises standing upright, with sleek greenish-blue exoskeletons and complex, multifaceted eyes that shifted colors with subtle mood changes. They wore what appeared to be ceremonial garments, metallic fabric draped carefully to avoid touching their outer shells. "Greetings, representatives of Earth," the center Vorlathian said, its voice translated through the communication devices attached to the human suits. "I am Ambassador Tak, first voice of the Vorlathian High Council." Jewry stepped forward exactly 3 paces, the distance noted in the briefing materials as respectful. "Ambassador Tak, I am Commander Jewry Park of Earth's Interstellar Diplomatic Corps. We come with peaceful intentions and hopes for friendship between our worlds." The ambassador's eyes shifted to a pleasant blue shade. "Your study of our customs is appreciated, Commander. Please, follow us to the greeting hall where formal introductions will take place." The human delegation followed the Vorlathians through a series of arched corridors. The alien architecture favored high ceilings and wide passages, though certain sections narrowed unexpectedly. Everything gleamed with an iridescent quality that made depth perception tricky in the unfamiliar light. "The ceremonial procession will require precise movements," Ambassador Tuck explained as they approached a grand doorway. "You will walk 10 steps behind me, then stop at the circular platform before the Council of Elders." Jewry nodded, mentally rehearsing the steps. This first impression would shape relations between their species for generations. The doors slid open to reveal a vast chamber filled with hundreds of Vorlathians standing in perfect, motionless rows. Their silence was unnerving, broken only by occasional soft clicks from their mandibles. At the far end, 7 elder Vorlathians sat on elevated platforms, their exoskeletons a deeper, more burnished color than the others. Ambassador Tak began the formal procession, his movements deliberate and graceful despite his seemingly rigid body. Jewry followed at the prescribed distance, counting her steps carefully. The environmental suit felt clumsy compared to the Vorlathians' fluid movements. As they approached a particularly narrow section of the walkway, Jewry noticed a slight depression in the floor. Some kind of ceremonial marker, perhaps. She focused on it, trying to determine if she should step over or on it. This momentary distraction was her undoing. The Vorlathian walking beside Ambassador Tak shifted position unexpectedly. Jewry, attempting to maintain her prescribed path, found herself suddenly too close to the ambassador. She tried to adjust her trajectory, but the bulky suit limited her agility. Her shoulder brushed against Ambassador Tak's upper limb. It was barely contact at all, a whisper of touch through her suit. But the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Ambassador Tak jerked away with surprising speed, emitting a high-pitched sound that needed no translation to convey alarm. Every Vorlathian in the chamber froze, their eye facets rapidly cycling through colors, blue to yellow to angry red. "Contact." Someone chittered from the crowd. The word rippled through the assembly, growing in volume. Jewry stepped back, raising her hands in the universal gesture of peace. "I apologize for the accidental contact, Ambassador. It was not intentional." But Ambassador Tak's posture had changed completely. He stood taller now, his limbs extended in what the briefing had identified as a formal challenge stance. His voice, when it came through the translator, sounded different, more ceremonial, almost theatrical. "You touched me without permission, human." His mandibles clicked rapidly. "Do you realize what you have done? The sacred laws of contact are clear." Captain Du-hyun moved forward. "Ambassador, please accept our deepest apologies for this misunderstanding. Commander Park meant no disrespect to your customs." But the Vorlathian elders had risen to their feet, all speaking at once in their clicking language. The translator struggled to keep up, fragments coming through. "Ancient law. Binding. No exceptions, even for offworlders." Ambassador Tak raised his upper limbs, silencing the chamber. When he spoke again, his voice held a strange mixture of shock and something Juri couldn't quite identify, almost like satisfaction. "The law is absolute and predates even our space travel. Any being who initiates unauthorized physical contact with a Vorlathian of high standing has, by our most sacred traditions, initiated a mate claim. You must now become my mate." Juri felt the blood drain from her face. This wasn't in any of the briefings. "There must be some mistake in the translation," she managed to say. "There is no mistake," one of the elders responded, stepping forward. "The touching law has bound our society for 10,000 cycles. It ensures that all contact is meaningful, consensual, and properly witnessed. You have claimed Ambassador Tak as your mate before hundreds of witnesses." The human delegation erupted in whispers behind her. Juri's mind raced through possible diplomatic responses, finding none adequate for this situation. "Surely an exception can be made for those who don't know your laws," she tried. "Ignorance of law does not negate it," the elder replied firmly. "The bonding ceremony will commence at next rotation. Until then, you will be instructed in your new duties as mate to a High Council representative." As Juri stood speechless, she noticed something odd. Though Ambassador Tak maintained his formal posture of outrage, his eyes had briefly shifted to a color not mentioned in the briefings, a subtle purple shade that disappeared so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "This is absurd," Captain Du-hyun protested. "We came for diplomatic relations, not marital ones." "Then perhaps," Ambassador Tak said, his voice suddenly silky through the translator, "your representative should have maintained proper diplomatic distance. The ceremony preparations begin immediately. The human will come with me." Juri paced the gleaming chamber where she had been escorted after the disastrous first contact ceremony. The room was clearly designed for Vorlathian comfort, too tall, too cool, with strange angular furniture that looked impossible for a human to use comfortably. She had removed her environmental suit after tests confirmed the atmosphere was safe, but that only made her feel more vulnerable. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, running her hands through her short black hair. "I can't become some alien's mate because of an accidental touch." The door slid open with a soft hiss. Her aide, Ha-won, entered carrying a data tablet. His usually calm face showed clear stress. "Any news from Earth Command?" Juri asked hopefully. Ha-won shook his head. "Communication is still being routed through Vorlathian channels. They claim it's standard procedure, but I suspect they're filtering our messages." "What about the legal codes? There must be exceptions to this." "Make claim nonsense. I've been studying what they provided," Ha-won replied, scrolling through his tablet. "The Vorlathian legal system is incredibly rigid. Physical boundaries are the foundation of their entire social structure. According to these texts, unauthorized touching is viewed as either assault or a mate claim, depending on context." Juri sat down on a low bench, the only piece of furniture that seemed remotely designed for human use. "There's more," Ha-won continued. "Ambassador Tak has requested a private meeting with you. Alone." "Perfect," Juri said sarcastically. "My alien fiancé wants a date. This might be an opportunity to negotiate, Captain Du-hyun thinks." A series of sharp taps at the door interrupted him. A Vorlathian guard entered, followed by Ambassador Tak. Without the translator device from her suit, Juri couldn't understand the brief exchange between the two aliens, but it ended with the guard leaving and the door sliding shut. Ambassador Tak approached a small device on the wall and adjusted something. A soft hum filled the room. "We can speak freely now," he said in perfect, unaccented English. "I've disabled the monitoring systems." Juri stared in shock. "You speak our language?" "Without a translator. I've studied your species extensively," Tak replied, his voice losing the formal tone from earlier. "But few Vorlathians have bothered to learn English. It gives us privacy." The ambassador's body language had completely transformed. Gone was the rigid formality. His posture now seemed almost relaxed as he settled onto a tall perch across from her. "I must apologize for the public display," he continued, "but I needed to maintain appearances. The situation is complicated." "Complicated?" Juri repeated incredulously. "You've essentially forced me into an arranged marriage because of a brush against your arm." Tak's compound eyes shifted to a deep purple color, the same shade Juri had glimpsed briefly during the ceremony. "If I could have prevented it, I would have," he said quietly. "But the touch happened before hundreds of witnesses, including the most conservative elders. Had I not immediately invoked the mate claim law, you would have been arrested for assault instead." Juri exchanged a confused glance with Hawan. "So this was the better option." "Politically, yes. I lead a reform movement that seeks to abolish these outdated laws. My opponents would have loved to use this incident to showcase the dangerous nature of humans." Tak's mandibles clicked softly. "By claiming you as my mate instead, I prevented that narrative. I appreciate you saving me from alien jail," Juri said carefully, "but I can't actually become your mate." "Of course not," Tak agreed immediately. "The entire concept is absurd across species lines, but we can use this situation to benefit both our peoples." Hawan leaned forward. "You want to use Commander Park. I want us to help each other," Tak corrected. "The touch taboo exists because of my species' latent telepathic abilities. Physical contact can create mental connections between Vorlathians. The elders fear what might happen if we connect with aliens." Juri felt a chill run down her spine. "Telepathic abilities. That wasn't in any of our briefings." "Because we keep it hidden from outsiders," Tak explained. "For thousands of years, we've built our entire society around preventing unauthorized mental connections. The rules made sense when we were primitive and couldn't control these abilities. Now they're just chains holding us back from true connection with other species." "And when I touched you," Juri began. "Nothing happened," Tak finished. "No mental connection formed, which confirms what my research suggested. Our telepathy is species-specific. But the conservatives don't want this proven because it undermines their control." Hawan had been taking notes furiously. "So the mate claim is actually your way of protecting Commander Park while gathering evidence for your reform movement." "Precisely," Tak said. "Though we must be careful. My political enemies would do anything to undermine this first contact." Juri stood and walked to the window, looking out at the alien landscape of Vorlath, crystalline structures stretching toward a pale green sky. "So what happens now? Do we just pretend to be mates until your political situation resolves?" "For now, yes. You'll need to participate in some ceremonies, learn basic mate customs, and be seen with me in public. Meanwhile, we'll search for a legal loophole to dissolve the claim without offense." Juri turned back, studying the alien who had so dramatically changed her mission. Despite his insect-like appearance, she was beginning to read subtle shifts in his posture that indicated sincerity. "There's something you're not telling us," she said, noticing a slight twitch in his upper limbs. Tak's eyes shifted colors again. "Perceptive. The timing of your arrival is suspicious. First contact was proceeding well through remote communications. Then suddenly, the High Council insisted on rushed in-person meetings, with ceremonial elements that haven't been used in generations." "You think we were set up?" Hawan asked sharply. "I think something larger is happening." Tak replied. The touch incident plays perfectly into the narrative my opponents want, that aliens are dangerous and unpredictable. Juri folded her arms. Or that your reform movement is reckless for bringing humans here. Exactly. Tak stood suddenly. Someone wanted this diplomatic mission to fail. And they're not finished yet. As if on cue, an alarm began to sound throughout the complex. The door to their chamber slid open as a panicked Vorlathian guard shittered rapidly. Tak's eyes flashed red. The conservative faction is demanding an immediate bonding ceremony. He translated for the humans. They're claiming security concerns require us to formalize the mate claim immediately, not at next rotation as is traditional. Why? Juri asked. To trap us both before we can find a way out of this, Tak said grimly. The game is moving faster than I anticipated. 3 days after the rushed bonding ceremony, Juri found herself following Tak through the lower levels of the Grand Archive. The ceremony had been strange but bearable, mostly involving ritualized movements and spoken vows that the translator rendered into awkwardly poetic English. At least there had been no physical contact required, which seemed ironic given that an accidental touch had started everything. Are you sure we should be down here? She whispered, eyeing the dim crystalline corridors. Unlike the gleaming upper levels of Vorlathian architecture, these passages looked ancient, carved directly into the bedrock of the planet. The oldest records are kept here, Tak replied, his voice low. And the security monitoring is minimal. The elders believe strongly in tradition, but care little for actually studying historical documents. The passageway opened into a vast chamber filled with what looked like thin sheets of translucent crystal, stacked in elaborate patterns. Tak approached one of the formations and carefully extracted a sheet. These are the original legal codices, he explained, written over 10,000 cycles ago, before we developed digital storage. Juri peered at the crystal. To her, it appeared blank. How do you read them? Tak held the sheet at an angle, letting the light catch it differently. Suddenly, intricate patterns became visible, etched deep within the crystal itself. The records are three-dimensional. They require proper light and perspective to be read. His compound eyes shifted rapidly, scanning the ancient text. Here, this is the section on personal boundaries and physical contact. Juri waited patiently as Tak read through several sheets, occasionally making soft clicking sounds that her time with him had taught her indicated surprise or concern. This is strange, he finally said. The oldest version of the touch laws contains extensive exceptions and conditions, nothing like the absolute prohibitions we practice today. He pulled another crystal sheet from a different stack. This version, from 2,000 cycles later, is much more rigid. And look at the script pattern here. He pointed to markings that meant nothing to Juri. This writing style doesn't match our other documents from that period. You think they were altered? She asked. Not just altered. Some of these sections appear to have been added entirely. Tak's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Juri now recognized as anger. The make claim law specifically, it doesn't exist in the original texts at all. Juri felt a surge of hope. So I'm not actually required to be your mate. According to the original laws, no. The question is, who changed them, and when, and why? Tak set down the crystal sheet and moved deeper into the chamber. We need to check the historical accounts from when we first encountered other species. They spent hours carefully examining the ancient records. Juri couldn't read the alien text, but she helped Tak organize and compare the crystal sheets. A pattern began to emerge. Here, Tak said finally, holding up a particularly old-looking sheet. The first significant changes to our touch laws came after contact with the Drell consortium, about 8,000 cycles ago. Who are the Drell? Juri asked. A species we rarely mention anymore. They're described here as traders and mediators who helped Vorlathians establish relations with other worlds. Tak's eyes shifted to a troubled yellow hue, but these records show they also provided cultural guidance to help us safely interact with other species. Ju-Rai leaned against a crystal pillar, processing this information. So an alien species advised your ancestors to avoid touching other species. That seems convenient for them. Extremely convenient, Tak agreed, especially considering this next record, which shows the Drell maintained exclusive trading rights with Vorlath for nearly 2,000 cycles afterward. A slight noise from the corridor made both of them freeze. Tak quickly reshelved the crystal they'd been examining and pulled Ju-Ri behind a large storage unit. Two Vorlathians entered the chamber, moving with purpose. In the dim light, Ju-Ri could make out the distinctive formal attire of Elder Suk, the head of the conservative faction who had pushed for the rushed bonding ceremony. The humans must not be allowed access to these archives, Elder Suk was saying to his companion. Our arrangement with the observers requires absolute compliance with tradition. The observers grow concerned, the second Vorlathian replied. The human diplomatic vessel carries scanning technology that might detect their presence in orbit. Ju-Ri felt Tak stiffen beside her. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, "Observers is an old term for the Drell." Elder Suk's voice grew sharper. "The humans will be gone soon enough. Once the new mate bond is sealed with the ritual isolation period, we can arrange an unfortunate incident. The human leaders will be too afraid of our response to risk sending another mission." Ju-Ri's blood ran cold. The isolation period was scheduled to begin the next day, a 2-week tradition where newly bonded mates retreated from society to strengthen their connection. She and Tak would be completely vulnerable. The elders continued their conversation as they moved deeper into the archives. When their voices faded, Tak began gently pulling Ju-Ri toward a different exit. "We need to leave immediately," he whispered. "It's worse than I thought. The Drell never left. They've been manipulating our society for millennia." They slipped through the dark corridors, taking a roundabout path to avoid being seen. Ju-Ri's mind raced with questions, but she stayed silent until they reached a small antechamber that Tak quickly secured. "The Drell are still in contact with your leaders. After thousands of years," she finally asked. "It explains everything," Tak said, his voice tight with anger. "The extreme isolation policies, the touch prohibitions, the limited technological development in certain areas despite our advanced capabilities in others. But why? What do they gain? Control. Resources. Our world is rich in crystalline formations that have unique properties, and our position in this sector of space is strategically valuable." Ju-Ri paced the small room. "We need to contact my ship, warn them about these observers. The communication systems are all monitored," Tak reminded her. "And now we know why. The Drell have agents among our leadership." A sudden commotion in the corridor outside made them both tense. Tak peered through a small viewing port. "Security forces," he hissed. "They must have discovered we were in the archives." The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Tak backed away, looking around desperately for an escape route. "There's no other exit," he said grimly. The door shuddered again. Ju-Ri spotted a ventilation shaft high on the wall. "There," she pointed. "Can you reach it?" Tak stretched to his full height, his limbs easily reaching the vent cover. "I can, but it's too small for me to fit through." "I can fit," Ju-Ri said. "Help me up." The door began to give way as Tak lifted Ju-Ri toward the vent. As she pulled herself into the narrow shaft, her hand gripped Tak's exoskeleton for balance. Instantly, a jolt of energy passed between them. Images flooded Ju-Ri's mind, memories that weren't hers, of ancient Vorlathians touching freely, of strange insectoid beings she somehow knew were Drell-altering documents, of generations of deception. When the connection broke, Ju-Ri found herself half suspended in the vent, staring down at Tak's shocked face. "You saw it too," he whispered. The door finally burst open before she could answer. As security forces swarmed into the room, Ju-Ri pulled herself fully into the ventilation shaft. The last thing she saw was Tak standing proudly defiant, his eyes fixed on hers, communicating a clear message. Run. Find help. The truth must be known. Jewry crawled through the narrow ventilation shaft, her knees and elbows raw from scraping against the metal. The images from her telepathic connection with Tak still burned in her mind. Centuries of manipulation by the Drell, generations of Vorlathians living under false cultural restrictions. Most shocking was the revelation that touch-based telepathy had once been celebrated, not feared, among Tak's people. After what seemed like hours, she found an exit grate that opened into an empty storage room. She dropped down quietly, listening for pursuers. Finding none, she slipped into the corridor, trying to remember the layout of the diplomatic complex. "Commander Park," a voice whispered from a nearby doorway. Jewry spun, ready to run, but relaxed when she saw Hawan's familiar face. "Thank goodness," she said, hurrying toward him. "We need to warn the ship. The Vorlathian elders are working with an alien species called the Drell. They're planning something against our mission." Hawan pulled her into the room, quickly shutting the door. "Captain Duhyun already suspects something. He sent me to find you when you missed the scheduled check-in. What happened to Ambassador Tak?" "Security forces captured him. We discovered that the touch laws, including the mate claim that supposedly binds us, were fabricated by the Drell thousands of years ago." Jewry ran her fingers through her dusty hair. "And when I touched Tak, I actually experienced some kind of telepathic connection. I saw his people's true history." Hawan looked skeptical. "Telepathy? Are you sure it wasn't some kind of hallucination?" "I'm sure. And we need to use this information." Jewry began pacing. "The Vorlathians have been manipulated into fearing physical contact to prevent them from discovering the truth about the Drell. If we can show them what really happens when they touch, we might start a revolution." "That's a lot to accomplish while being hunted by security forces," Hawan pointed out. A soft knock at the door made them both freeze. Hawan cautiously approached, hand on his sidearm. He opened the door a crack, then quickly stepped back as 3 young Vorlathians slipped inside. "We are friends of Tak," the foremost one said through a portable translator. "I am Lin, this is Mok and Da. We have been part of the reform movement for many cycles." Jewry studied them. They were younger than most Vorlathians she had seen, their exoskeletons brighter and less textured. "Is Tak safe?" she asked. "He is being held for mental cleansing," Lin replied, compound eyes shifting to a sorrowful blue. "But before they took him, he managed to send us a message about what you discovered in the archives. About the Drell manipulation. We have suspected something like this," Mok added. "Many young Vorlathians have questioned why our oldest literature describes a more tactile society." Jewry felt a surge of hope. "Then you already have doubts about the touch prohibitions." The 3 exchanged looks. Day, who had remained silent, stepped forward. "Some of us have experimented. Brief touches between trusted friends. We discovered that with practice, we can control the telepathic connection, make it less overwhelming." "Which directly contradicts what the elders teach," Lin said. "They claim touch always leads to mental chaos and loss of identity." "Because the Drell don't want you connecting with each other or other species," Jewry explained. "It keeps you isolated and easier to control." Hawan, who had been monitoring a small device, looked up urgently. "Security patrols are increasing. We need to move." "We have a plan," Lin said. "If you are willing to take a risk, Commander Park." "I'm listening," Jewry replied. "The yearly ceremony of community begins in 2 hours. All citizens gather in public squares to watch the elders' address. It's broadcast throughout the planet." Mok continued. "Tak is scheduled to participate, as he's now a high elder due to his connection with you. They will force him to denounce his reform ideas publicly." "But we can use this," Dai finished. "If we can reach the broadcast center and show evidence of the Drell manipulation, while demonstrating controlled touch between species." "You want to touch me in front of everyone?" Jewry asked. "Won't that just confirm their fears about humans?" Not if it reveals the truth instead of causing harm, Lin said. The elders have always taught that touching aliens would destroy our minds. If we prove otherwise, while exposing the Drell conspiracy. Ju considered the danger. Even if we reach the broadcast center, how do we know the telepathic connection will happen again? Or that it will show the right memories? The connection follows intent, Dad explained. Focus on what you wish to share, and that is what will transfer. 2 hours later, Ju found herself crouched with the others in a maintenance tunnel beneath the main broadcast plaza. Above them, thousands of Vorlathians had gathered for the ceremony. Through small observation ports, they could see the elders assembled on a grand stage, with Tak standing slightly apart, his limbs bound with ceremonial restraints. Elder Suk approached the central podium. Citizens of Vorlath, his amplified voice boomed. Today we reaffirm our sacred traditions that have kept us safe and prosperous for 10,000 cycles. That's our cue, Lin whispered. The young Vorlathians led Juri and Hawan through a narrow access hatch that opened behind the main stage controls. The technicians, startled by their appearance, barely had time to react before Hawan disabled the security systems. Mok quickly took control of the broadcast equipment. Ready? Lin asked Juri. She nodded, heart pounding. Mok activated the emergency override, cutting Elder Suk mid-sentence and projecting Juri's image on the massive screens around the plaza. Citizens of Vorlath, she said, her voice steady despite her fear. I am Commander Juri Park of Earth. You have been told that I violated your sacred laws by touching Ambassador Tak, but those laws are based on lies. Chaos erupted in the plaza. On stage, Elder Suk was shouting orders as security forces scrambled to locate the broadcast source. Your ancient records prove that the touch prohibitions were created after contact with the Drell, Juri continued. They have manipulated your society for thousands of years, keeping you isolated and afraid. Lin stepped into view beside her. What she says is true. We have seen the original records. The broadcast cut to images they had captured from the archive crystals, showing the contradictions between original laws and their later versions. On stage, Tak suddenly broke free from his surprised guards. He rushed to the podium. Listen to them. His voice cut through the confusion. I have seen the truth through touch connection with the human. The Drell have been using us, keeping us divided from other species. Security forces surrounded the broadcast booth. We're almost out of time, Hawan warned. One more thing, Juri said. She turned to Lin. Are you ready? The young Vorlathian nodded. As millions washed across the planet, Juri slowly extended her hand. Lin reached out with a trembling limb. Their touch was broadcast in close-up detail. Lin's eyes widened, shifting through cascades of colors as the telepathic connection formed. But instead of the pain and madness the elders had always predicted, Lin remained standing, clearly in control. I see it, Lin said in awe, voice carrying through the broadcast. The true history of our people. We weren't always afraid. We once celebrated our touch bonds with festivals and shared memories. The door to the broadcast booth burst open. As security forces rushed in, the last image transmitted across Vorlath was of Lin's eyes shining with a brilliant, never-before-seen gold color, the color of revelation. The revolution of touch had begun.